Okay, today we're going to learn about factoring by grouping. This is not in your journal or in the book. It might be a little bit in the book, but it's not in the journal, so take notes. This is IM2, and this goes with section 2.4. Okay, so sometimes the GCF of a term is a binomial. This GCF is called a common binomial factor. We learned earlier that you can factor out a common binomial factor the same way you factor out a monomial factor. So if I was going to factor this expression down here, here's my common binomial factor, and I would factor it out, and you could put it in the front, and you put what's left in the second parentheses. And you can rearrange things if you want to. You can put this one in the back. It doesn't matter. These are multiplication, therefore commutative property applies. You could rearrange these inside so you have the x's first, but this is still correct. Okay, so if I was going to factor this one, the first thing I have to notice is I have a common binomial factor. But what am I going to put in the second parentheses? So I put my b squared plus 1. That's my common binomial factor. But I have to remember that there is one of those. Remember, there's always that hidden 1 that's in front of it. So my second parentheses would look like this. Another thing you need to remember to completely factor something is you never leave a negative like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to factor that out, and just factor it out and put it at the beginning. Make sure you factor it out of the whole term, and that would be the final factor of this. So notice it's negative 1 times 2b minus 1, and then we're multiplying it by this one, but the 1 can go up in front, okay? You want to keep the 1 up in front. You don't want to put it in between. That would be confusing. So you put it up in front because these are 3 terms, and they're being multiplied together. So commutative property. You can put the negative 1 in front. And there you go. Okay, you may be able to factor a polynomial by grouping. When a polynomial has 4 terms, notice this one, you can make 2 groups and factor out the GCF from each group. And we'll use this later for another kind of factoring, so it's really good to learn. So the first step is to group the terms that have a common factor or variable. So these both have an h. These both have a number that is divisible by 4. You want to try to put the higher exponents together. So sometimes you have to rearrange. This one was already arranged, so we could do that. The second one is to factor each parentheses, take out the GCF of each group. So you can see I did that here. So these both have that in common. After you've done that, then you'll notice that you have a common binomial factor. So what are we going to do there? We're going to factor that out. So there we are, and we've factored by grouping. Now, another important thing to notice here is that this is not completely factored. So I'm going to factor out a 2, and I'm left with h cubed plus 2 times 3h minus 2. And now it's completely factored. You always want to look back and make sure you have completely factored your polynomial. Okay, with this one, it's already in the right order, so I don't have to rearrange. I'm going to put my parentheses to make my groups. Then I'm going to factor the GCF out of each one, out of each group. So I'm going to factor out a 5y cubed, and I'm left with y. Then think about how you're dividing it. 15 divided by 5 is 3. Y cubed divided by y cubed is 1. Okay, over here, what can I factor out here? Just a y. So I get y minus 3. The whole goal is that you get a common binomial factor, so you should always look for that. This is, once you've done one, it's kind of a hint of what you're looking for in the second one. So now I'm going to group them together. 5w cubed plus y, and then I put my common binomial factor at the end. Remember, it doesn't matter which order these are in, but I noticed as I was working that this one has something else that can be factored. So I'm going to factor out a y, and I get 5y squared plus 1 times y minus 3. Now, if you had noticed that y at the beginning, you could have factored the y out at the very beginning. So you could have said y, 5y cubed minus 15y squared plus y minus 3. And then you could have still done your grouping with this. So again, it doesn't matter as long as when you're done, it is completely factored. Okay, so let's look at this one. We're going to put our grouping symbols on. Okay, you always want to make sure there's 4 terms. That's when you do grouping. I'm going to factor out a 2b squared, and I'm left with 3b plus 4. And then when I factor over here, I'm going to look at the 9b and say, I want 3b. Oh, so I'm going to factor out a 3. And I get 3b, and then of course, check to make sure that when you divide 12 by 3, you also get 4. Okay? Then you're going to regroup 3b plus 4 times 2b squared plus 3. And again, it doesn't matter which order your sets of parentheses are in. Okay, for this one, I noticed that the r squared is here. I'm going to move it. So when I move it using commutative property, I have to zip-zap and keep the negative with the r squared. So I'm going to rearrange into standard form. 4r cubed minus r squared plus 24r minus 6. Now I'm going to put my grouping symbols on, factor out an r squared. I get 4r minus 1 plus factor out a 6, and I get 4r minus 1. So I regroup. Again, it doesn't matter which parentheses goes first, as long as they're both there. So there we go. Okay? Okay, so it's important that you're able to recognize opposite binomials once in a while, and that can help you factor some polynomials. So notice that the binomial 5 minus x and x minus 5 are opposites. I can rewrite the first one as -1 times this one. All they did was rearrange. So notice they did it in a long version here. They factored out the -1 and they got this, or they actually are distributing it back. So they're just showing you, proving that to you. Okay, now how does that come in handy? So let's look at the next problem. So notice that they've got it in order, but this one should be written, if we're putting it in standard form, like this. And this is important to remember when we factor. So now I'm going to do my grouping. Okay, I'm going to factor out a 2x squared. I'm left with x minus 6. Over here, I'm going to factor out a -3. And I'm left with x minus 6. You always want to make sure that you factor out the negative of both terms. So my common binomial factor is x minus 6, and my other term is 2x squared minus 3. There we go. And I did that. Okay, so for this one, it looks like it's already been grouped, but we notice that our binomials are not common terms. However, if we factor out a negative from negative s plus 6 from this term, then we can see that it's going to give us our common binomial factor. So all you do is take that negative and give it to the 5. So we're going to go 4s times s plus 6 plus -5, because it's a -1 times the 5, and then s plus 6. Now we have a common binomial factor, s plus 6, and our two terms are 4s minus 5. So I gave this one to you in this form so that you would see exactly how it might look. The original equation was 4s squared plus 24s plus negative 5s minus 30. Okay? So you might not have noticed this negative needed to come out, and so that's why it's helpful to do it this way, to show it to you when it looks like this. Okay, so first thing I want to do is I want to put this in standard form. Remember that the negative will go with the 10, so I get negative 10x cubed plus 15x squared plus 8x minus 12. Now before I do my grouping, I'm going to factor out that negative 1. So when I factor that out, I have to factor it out of every term here. So every term becomes the opposite. So 10x cubed minus 15x minus 8x plus 12. Now I'm going to do my grouping, and I'm going to put this negative down here so I don't forget about it, but so that it doesn't get in the way of my math, okay? So I'm going to go 10x cubed minus 15x squared, I forgot my square there, plus, now notice I'm going to put a plus here, and then group a negative 8x plus 12. It's really important that you always have a plus here, and this minus only goes to the 8. So I zip zap it, and I put it with the 8 so that I remember that negative. Okay? Very important step. Okay, now I'm going to factor out my common terms, my GCF of each group. So I'm going to do 5x squared, and I'm left with 2x minus 3. Okay, over here I'm going to factor out a negative 4. Okay, so negative 4, and I'm left with 2x minus 3. Remember, I'm dividing by the negative, so that the term here will change as well. So there's all these little steps that you have to remember. Okay, now I see that I'm finally done. I take a quick glance at these terms and say, nope, there's nothing more to factor out. So I'm going to put my common binomial factor here, and my 5x squared minus 4 here, and I'm done. Now you'll notice that they put this one first. Like I said before, this is negative 1 times a number, and common, and the commutative property says I can move them around any way I want, but the negative should always be out in front. Okay, this is your exit ticket. They are on your Google Classroom, and you get to answer them today, and just put your answers there, and good luck.